Hello folks and welcome to Charlie and Cameron Investigate episode 2. Today we look at to what extent the Whig view of the role of Parliament under Elizabeth is valid.
Was Parliament a rising power, perhaps even a tiger with an organised opposition?
Or was Parliament just a mere tabby cat?
What do I do with these MPs in Parliament?
Neil believed in the Puritan choir and found it particularly significant that in 1566 the Commons attempted for the first time on record to postpone agreeing the Queen's request for money until she had satisfied their grievances. Although this was not successful, Neil sees this as sort of the start of what would happen in the Civil War in 1640. However, revisionist historians such as Elton disagree with Neil's argument, pointing to the fact that in the 1566 Puritan pamphlet, which had 43 MPs' names on it, wasn't really a Puritan pamphlet, and at least 12 of the names on the pamphlet were in fact men of business, of privy councillors such as Burleigh, including Thomas Norton, who Neil pointed to as the archetypal Puritan sort of man, and in fact he only had moderate Protestant beliefs.
After Elizabeth had recently been ill with smallpox, her privy councillors felt it essential that Elizabeth marries. With the council being split over Archduke Ferdinand, councillors used the Commons to petition the Queen to marry, as they feared her wrath and did not want to question her directly. The Commons was manipulated for use by Elizabeth's councillors. It was not growing opposition from within the Commons. For example, that if there was opposition to Elizabeth, that it did in fact come from her councillors. This can be seen by Leicester curating pamphlets and using the Privy Chamber to convince the Queen not to marry. Although some of this may have been personal feelings, but he also felt he would have been protecting the realm. For example, if Elizabeth was to die, then a Frenchman would be in control of England. His use of the Privy Chamber is another example of how the councillors used the tools available to persuade and influence the Queen.
My lady, you must tell Her Majesty of what great danger she would be in if she were to bear a child at her grand old age, like hers. And if she were to die, she would leave the country in the hands of a frog! A filthy frog!
I will do as you wish, my lord. Your Majesty, you cannot possibly marry this man. You dare tell me what to do? She's right, my queen! How so? At your age, it is alarmingly dangerous for you to bear a child. She speaks the truth, your Majesty. Take a look at Lady Montague. 5 Elizabeth, England will be left without an heir. I will make a decision come sunrise.
In 1568, Mary Queen of Scots arrived in England from Scotland. Due to her Catholicism and a legitimate claim to the English throne, she quickly gathered support in the north, and this was a large cause for the Northern Rebellion that happened in 1569. This combined with the excommunication of Elizabeth in 1570 and the Ridolfi Plot of 1571 meant Parliament was called. Neil argues that radical groups in Parliament gained new leaders, such as Thomas Cartwright, who were actively trying to change the English Church. However, we believe that the Parliament in 1571 was that the council feared for Elizabeth's safety, and thus there was a campaign to exclude Mary Queen of Scots from the royal line. This campaign was led by two councillors named Knollys and Croft.
We are gathered here today on the orders of the Queen and her Privy Council to discuss the issue of the recent rebellion in the north and the recent excommunication of Elizabeth issued by the Pope. Order!
These Catholic fools can never leave us alone. We must rise up against them, and the first way we can do this is by abolishing all they know from the Church once and for all.
No! What we must prioritise is the Queen's safety! This Ridolfi plot is a step too far. Mary Queen of Scots must be executed immediately to preserve the safety of our Queen!
Mary will not be executed.
Order! The Queen has spoken. This is final.
However, perhaps to solve this issue, we may get rid of another perpetrator, the Duke of Norfolk.
First, all matters that concern God's honour through free speech shall be propagated here and set forward, and all things that do hinder it, removed, repulsed, and taken away. Next, there is nothing commodious, profitable, or in any way beneficial for the prince or state, but faithful and loving subjects will offer it in this place. Amongst other, Mr. Speaker, two things do great hurt in this place, of which I do not mean to speak. The one is a rumour which runneth about the house, and this is it. Take heed what you do. The Queen's Majesty liketh not such a matter. Whosoever prefereth it, she will be offended with him. Or the contrary, Her Majesty liketh of such matter. Whosoever speaketh against it, she will be much offended with him. The other, sometimes a message is brought into the house, either of commanding or inhibiting, very injurious to the freedom of speech and consultation. I would to God, Mr. Speaker, that these two were buried in hell. I mean rumours and messages, for wicked undoubtedly they are. The reason is, the devil was the first author of them, from whom proceedeth nothing but wickedness. Upon this speech the House of reverent regard of Her Majesty's honour stopped his further proceeding before he had fully finished his speech. Mr. Wentworth being sequestered to the House. It was agreed and ordered by the House upon the question, after sundry motions and disputations and had therein, that he should be presently committed to the sergeant's ward as a prisoner, and so remaining should be examined upon his said speech for the extenuating of his fault therein.
Mr. Alloway, what did Wentworth's speech mean?
Well, Neil believes that Wentworth, who demanded freedom of speech for the Commons on all subjects, became a heroic figure in Parliament's struggle for liberties and privileges. However, revisionists such as Graves believes that Wentworth did little to enhance the efficiency of the Commons at all. He was little more than a nuisance, Graves argues. The fact that the Commons itself was sent Wentworth to the Tower for this offence shows that they were actually in support of the Queen, and that there was not an organised opposition. And Elizabeth continued to impose a limited version of the freedom of speech on the Commons throughout.
In 1584, the assassination of William of Orange as well as another discovery of a plot against Elizabeth, led to Parliament being called again. This led to an Act for the Queen's safety being passed, but not the Band of Association statute, as Burghley designed. Parliament was again called in 1586. Elizabeth's councillors wanted Parliament to persuade Elizabeth to execute Mary.
Neil believes this emphasised the emerging threat of Puritans, with Anthony Cope's reintroduction of Turner's Bill and Book. But it is clear to us that any opposition was led by Elizabeth's councillors, e.g. Knowlesy in the Commons and Burghley in the Lords. Cope, Wentworth and 3 others were arrested for discussing the bill outside Parliament, and Walsingham, after revealing the so-called Stratford plot against Elizabeth, frightened her into signing the death warrant. From this evidence, it is clear that the councillors were the ones using Parliament to persuade her into action, and it was not a base of opposition.
Was the monopolies issue an example of organised opposition or a spontaneous rising in the Commons?
Well, Whig historians such as Neil would have you believe that this was an example of rebellion in the Commons, by organised opposition over the Queen's misuse of royal prerogative and the growing monopolies raising consumer prices. However, this was no more than a mere spontaneous response to a common grievance, an example of rising discontent, particularly due to the context, as the worst harvest in the 16th century had just been experienced, increasing the financial pressures.